Just a few minutes ago, the world was rocked by shocking news. Alexander Lukashenko erupted in a heated argument with Nikol Pashinyan right at an international forum. What unfolded next wasn't shown on the evening news. This is a story that will leave you breathless, revealing why Pashinyan nearly vanished into thin air during Lukashenko's scathing remarks. Stick around to find out why this matters. The forum hall gleamed under the cold light of lamps reflecting off glass panels and chrome surfaces. Hundreds of cameras, like unblinking eyes, captured every movement, gesture, and expression. But the audience was riveted to the two figures at the long table draped in gray fabric. Alexander Lukashenko leaned slightly forward, his sturdy shoulders seemingly pressing against the chair, hands resting composedly on the table like a king overseeing his realm. His face bore a stern yet ironically calm expression, with a direct, confident gaze that emanated an unshakable authenticity. He was dressed in a dark suit, modestly paired with a subdued tie, as if to convey he wasn't there for superficial appearances. In stark contrast, Nikol Pashinyan fidgeted nervously. His eyes darted from his notes to the screen before him, from cameras to delegations. He adjusted his tie repeatedly and scribbled frantic notes, struggling to maintain focus. His sharp European-cut suit appeared too new, too streamlined, an unmistakable sign of someone trying to project an image of authority they may not genuinely possess. Journalists exchanged sidelong glances, sensing an impending showdown. As the moderator announced the topic, new alliances and values, an electric silence enveloped the auditorium. It was clear, this was not going to be ordinary diplomacy, but rather a fierce duel. Pashinyan spoke first, his pre-prepared remarks delivering a shaky conviction. The Soviet Union, he began, averting his gaze from the camera even as it quivered in anxiety. But the world has changed. Today, new alliances are vital, and the West stands ready to offer investments, technology, and equality, keys to our future. Some delegates nodded approval while others in the back murmured dissent, uneasy with his words. Meanwhile, Lukashenko listened, his lips curled in a hint of a smile, never interrupting. When Pashinyan finished, Lukashenko leaned back, adjusted his microphone, and spoke softly but deliberately. Nikol, he began, his tone both paternal and steely. As a young, passionate man, you believe history started yesterday. The cameras clicked in unison as tension hung in the air. He continued, addressing the bedrock of assertions Pashinyan had just made, emphasizing the contributions of Soviet factories and the scientists who built a legacy. Our educational system shaped millions. Who teaches our children today? Tentative applause trickled through the room. The intrigue deepened as Pashinyan furrowed his brow, gathering his composure for a counterattack. Old methods no longer work, he countered, raising his voice slightly, desperate to be heard. The world demands new values. But doubt lingered in his delivery. The atmosphere charged as eyes fixated on Lukashenko, waiting for his retort. As he straightened, his voice took on a firmer edge. Equality, Nikol, isn't about who marches in the streets seeking attention, he proclaimed, letting each word hang in the air for effect. Lukashenko's powerful imagery and conviction ignited the room, building tension as he accused the West of forgetting essential truths. The dynamic had shifted. Pashinyan's demeanor faltered, he felt the weight of his own words slipping through his fingers as the applause surged in Lukashenko's favor. Would Pashinyan recover in time to divert the narrative? As Lukashenko leaned closer, penetrating gaze locked onto Pashinyan's, a storm of political tension brewed, a dramatic clash that history would not forget. Just moments ago, the room was thick with tension. He straightened up, his voice growing firm and unwavering. Equality, Nikol, he said, means the worker's child shares a desk with the minister's son. It's not about marching in the streets to demand attention. He paused sharply, letting the weight of those words settle over the listeners. He spoke of cosmonauts, engineers, builders, the proud women and men of the Soviet era. That's real equality, he declared. It's about actions, not noise. His eyes scanned the room, igniting a wave of emotion. Remember the war? No one questioned values then. We all knew one truth, the motherland above all else. This is true equality. A ripple of applause broke out, cameras flashing to capture the charged moment. He didn't rush to sit but pressed on with even sharper resolve. Independence, he continued, is not about loans from Washington. It's about factories running and people having enough to eat. That is real strength. The crowd erupted in applause once more. Nikol Pashinyan tried to respond, but his words were swallowed by the ovation. Leaning forward, his eyes flashing like a sharpened blade, he delivered a thunderous reminder. Who cared then if we were Russian, Belarusian, or Armenian when the enemy was at our door? We stood shoulder to shoulder and we won. Pashinyan fell silent, visibly shaken. He felt his carefully rehearsed arguments slipping away, losing their grip in the charged atmosphere. One by one, delegates rose to applaud the powerful speech. Journalists sensed the story was made, the air buzzed with anticipation. Cameras clicked relentlessly, shutters snapped as if marking history itself. In the hush that followed, the hum of equipment was louder than the faint whispers of the reporters. The sensation was undeniable, a true sensation was born. Pashinyan nervously brushed his fingers across the table, as if trying to wipe away invisible dust. His hands trembled, he understood any word he uttered next would headline tomorrow's news. That pressure stuck in his throat, making every phrase feel hollow. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower, less certain than he intended. But the world has changed, he admitted quietly. What happened in the split second after those words left the air? The room held its breath, sensing that an unmissable clash was about to ignite anew. In the previous segment, we witnessed the palpable tension in the air as Nikol Pashinyan struggled to articulate his points, revealing a wobbling confidence. He finally conceded that the world had changed, yet that statement fell flat, lacking the weight he intended. Looking forward, we must focus on innovation, startups, and investments from the West, Pashinyan continued. His speech, once a bold charge, now felt defensive, slipping into justifications for his stance. The empty echoes of his rhetoric rang hollow. Alexander Lukashenko, listening with the poise of a seasoned mentor, seemed unfazed. His eyes sparkled with irony as Pashinyan faltered. When the Armenian leader fell silent, Alexander Grigorievich leaned in, savoring the moment. You know, Nikol. He locked eyes with his opponent. When we built the Dnipro hydroengine plant, talk of startups was non-existent. We didn't chase foreign investors when erecting the Bel-Az. Everything was built on our land, by our hands, and that foundation still stands today. He turned to address the room. Many pillars of our economy were born during the Soviet era. Energy, transportation, and science are not mere relics, they form the bedrock of our future. Without understanding our past, we cannot envision our future. His words struck like a gavel, igniting applause throughout the hall. Camera operators zoomed in, capturing the escalating drama. Pashinyan opened his mouth to respond, but his arguments faltered, crumbling under scrutiny. The figures and facts he had relied on tangled in his mind, morphing into an uncertain mumble. Sensing his opponent's anxiety, Lukashenko slyly remarked, "Precision is valued here. The facts speak for themselves, industries, factories, infrastructure from the Soviet Union still feed us today. This isn't just rhetoric, it's reality." A confident smile graced his face, reinforcing the truth behind his claim. The crowd buzzed with renewed energy as Pashinyan felt the heat rise in his cheeks, his arguments melting like ice in a scorching cup of tea. Here, every misstep resonated like a drumbeat in this charged atmosphere, amplifying the tension. Lukashenko seized the moment, sharpening his tone. The Soviet Union proved something vital. You can resurrect factories from ashes, construct cities from nothing, launch satellites, and provide free healthcare. That is true strength. Strength devoid of conscience is merely hollow metal. As he stepped closer, engaging the audience, his words carved deeper insights. Russia is the legacy of the Soviet Union, not nostalgia, but a lesson. Our future is built upon the sturdy foundations of a powerful past. With this final assertion, the applause surged again, drowning out all else. The audience rose in admiration, their overwhelming support overshadowing even the most skilled microphones. Journalists hurriedly captured this historic moment, recognizing its significance. Pashinyan, overwhelmed and flustered, watched as his arguments disintegrated under the spotlight of unwavering scrutiny. In this charged room, every thought felt heavy, like a weight pressing down, knowing that each word could turn into tomorrow's headline. In the high-stakes atmosphere filled with tension and anticipation, a pivotal moment unfolded during an international forum. As the debate heated up, Nikol Pashinyan felt the heat rise to his cheeks. His arguments began to wane like ice melting in a hot cup of tea. Every misstep echoed like a drumbeat, amplifying the tension in the room. This was no ordinary business meeting, this was a confrontation destined to be remembered. Then Alexander Lukashenko seized the opportunity, his tone sharp and unyielding. His voice resonated with authority. The cameras captured every subtle shift in their expressions, the stakes palpable. Lukashenko sat firm, exuding the steadiness of a granite rock, while Pashinyan contrasted sharply, his brows furrowed, hands twitching nervously, struggling to maintain a composed smile. The moderator cautiously nudged the conversation toward economic topics, aware of the gathering storm. "Listen closely," Lukashenko began, "the Soviet Union showed us that we could rise from ruins, build cities where none existed, launch satellites, and provide healthcare for free. That is true strength." He stepped forward, eager yet measured, his eyes fixed on Pashinyan, emphasizing his next statement. "Strength without conscience is as hollow as steel." A ripple of applause broke out, almost drowning out the murmurs from journalists furiously typing, documenting history in real time. The room surged with emotion, and as the applause crescendoed, Pashinyan became flustered, grappling with his waning composure. He wanted to respond. Yet his thoughts fragmented like glass shattered on the floor. In the silence that followed, Lukashenko delivered a line destined to reverberate through headlines: "Conscience has also changed." Laughter erupted, the audience's approval overwhelming. The cameras flashed, capturing a moment that would define this political clash. As Lukashenko continued, his tone softened, almost confiding. "I'm not afraid to say it, much of what was best came from the Soviet era. People were sincere, they worked with their hearts. Sure, it was tough, but it was fair. Today, we hear too many words, and too rarely see actions." The audience leaned in, heads nodding in agreement. It became clear, the diplomatic advantage belonged to Lukashenko. But this was merely the opening act, journalists sensed the storm was just beginning. In the corridors, whispers swirled like thick smoke, translators raced to keep up with the rapid-fire exchanges, and reporters, fueled by adrenaline, hammered out their stories without a second thought for coffee or distractions. The Soviet legacy once again ignited a fierce debate, all eyes fixed on the two figures in the spotlight. As Lukashenko and Pashinyan squared off, it wasn't just a clash of ideals, it was a battle for perception, a quest for dominance that would echo in history. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Pashinyan glanced around, sensing the dawning realization among the delegates. The facts and figures that Lukashenko had shared resonated powerfully, eclipsing mere slogans. Resolute, Pashinyan made one final attempt, but the times had indeed changed. People demanded freedom, equality, and new rights. Old methods belonged to a bygone era. Pashinyan's voice tightened, sounding nearly defensive. Lukashenko straightened. His gaze hardened, as if unsheathing a sword. Freedom. Equality. Each word rolled off his tongue as if he were savoring their weight. He articulated, "Equality is when the son of a worker and the son of a minister sit at the same desk. It's when a woman commands an icebreaker or ventures into space. It's when an Armenian and a Belarusian stand shoulder to shoulder defending their homeland. That is true equality." A wave of murmur swept through the audience. Some applauded, others whistled, but there was no indifference. Pashinyan sought to counter the charge, yet Lukashenko pressed relentlessly forward. "And, Nikol, independence is not when your budget relies on loans from across the ocean. Independence is when your factories are operational, your fields are sown, and your people know they will be fed tomorrow. That is true independence. Everything else is just a debt pit. The audience stood and applauded, a surge of support overwhelming the hall. Journalists struggled to capture every nuance of the encounter. Pashinyan clenched his fists beneath the table, knowing that every new argument he presented would just give Lukashenko more fuel for a stronger rebuttal. Then, as if to draw a decisive line, Lukashenko turned from Pashinyan and addressed the entire hall. During the wars, soldiers from the various Soviet republics didn't ask if their comrades were Belarusian, Russian, or Armenian. The enemy was singular, and their homeland was shared, thus, their victory belonged to all. That is a lesson that cannot be forgotten. A chorus of supportive shouts and applause erupted, with numerous hands rising in solidarity. Cameras captured each moment, preserving the intensity of the exchange. As the clamor of approval still echoed, Pashinyan leaned forward sharply. His expression hardened, his eyes flickered with determination. He understood that losing face before the world was not an option. Alexander Grigorievich, he asserted loudly, you dwell in memories. He continued, aiming for a crescendo. But a country cannot live forever in the past. The people demand change, new ideas, new alliances. The world has changed, and if we only look back, we will never move forward. This confrontation had shifted, tension filling the space with electric intensity, leaving everyone curious about how this clash of ideologies might resolve. What would come next? Would the past be a guiding light or a shackling chain for their future? The atmosphere crackled with tension as Nikol Pashinyan, with a quiver in his voice, challenged Alexander Lukashenko. You are living in memories, he proclaimed, striving to assert that a country cannot forever dwell on its past. The crowd murmured, sensing the stakes, their yearning for change, fresh ideas, and new alliances was palpable. The world has transformed, he insisted. If we only look back, we'll stagnate. In that moment, Lukashenko remained silent, allowing Pashinyan's words to hang in the air, simmering with unresolved emotions. Every letter of Pashinyan's speech resonated, but the impact was muted. Then, Lukashenko rose slowly, his towering presence eclipsing the podium. When he spoke, his voice reverberated through the hall as if shaking its very foundations. You talk of moving forward, he said, locking eyes with Pashinyan. But what is forward without understanding where you came from? Who built your home? Who cultivated your harvest? Who defended your lands? He gestured expansively, encompassing the audience, a visual embrace. The Soviet Union proved that one can rise from ruins, build cities from nothing, launch satellites, and provide free education and healthcare. That is true strength. Not slogans, not fleeting credits, not startups that vanish overnight. Silence engulfed the room, even the cameras paused. Then he continued, strength without conscience is mere iron. Some profit from war by selling weapons, while others strive to uplift their nations. That is the real difference. With a newfound intensity, he leaned towards Pashinyan, addressing him informally. You say the world has changed? Fine. But has conscience changed? The audience erupted with applause, the sound a tidal wave engulfing Pashinyan, whose confidence flickered and waned. The ensuing moments felt surreal to the journalists, who hastily noted, the quote of the day, has conscience changed? Pashinyan's face drained of color. Any retort he contemplated seemed inadequate. Meanwhile, Lukashenko continued with a calm yet unyielding demeanor. Russia is the successor of the Soviet Union. This is no nostalgia, it's a lesson. The future is birthed from a strong past. Without it, there is emptiness. Those who forget this lesson are doomed to repeat their errors. He paused, inhaling deeply, scanning the audience before adding, I'm unashamed to say that much that was best came from the Soviet era. People then worked with heart, building, fighting, and forging friendships. To forget that is to betray ourselves. As he concluded, the room erupted in thunderous ovation once again, the applause cascading like a wave, drowning out the remnants of debate. This confrontation was merely the beginning. As the air filled with whispers and anticipation, the curious eyes of journalists painted the impending future of this debate in ink and intrigue. Would Pashinyan rise from the ashes of defeat, or would Lukashenko's reign continue unchallenged? A few moments ago, the world was shaken by a newsflash. Alexander Lukashenko and Nikol Pashinyan found themselves in a heated debate at an international forum. What unfolded next is rarely covered by evening news programs. This story took everyone's breath away. Stay tuned until the end, and you'll discover why Pashinyan nearly vanished into the floor beneath him, thanks to Lukashenko's sharp rebuttal. The hall was bathed in the cool glow of overhead lights, their glow reflecting against glass panels and chrome surfaces. Hundreds of cameras, like emotionless eyes, captured every movement, every gesture, every smile or frown. Yet, all eyes were fixated on two figures at the center of a long, gray-clothed table. Alexander Lukashenko leaned slightly forward, his broad shoulders pressing against the chair, hands resting calmly on the table, presenting himself like the master of his domain. Although his face held a stern expression, a hint of calm irony shone through. His gaze was direct and assured, embodying an unpretentious simplicity that felt genuine. He wore a dark suit, complemented by a humble tie that seemed to say, "I'm not here for show." Beside him, Nikol Pashinyan appeared noticeably anxious. His eyes flitted from his notepad to the screen in front of him, from the cameras to various delegations. He constantly adjusted his tie and scribbled brief notes, struggling to focus. His tailored suit felt new, polished, an attempt to project confidence that perhaps wasn't entirely genuine. Journalists exchanged glances, all too aware that a clash was imminent. When the moderator introduced the topic new alliances and values, tension hung thick in the air. It wasn't going to be a diplomatic exchange but a true duel. Pashinyan was the first to speak, his prepped speech revealing the tremors of nerves in his voice. The Soviet Union, he began, feigning eye contact with the camera despite a slight tremor. The world has changed. We need new alliances, new directions, and the West is ready to offer them. Investments, technology, equality, this is what pays our future. A few delegates nodded in agreement, while soft murmurs echoed from the back, suggesting not everyone was on board with his words. Lukashenko listened silently, only a subtle smirk betraying his amusement as the applause began to fade. He leaned back slightly, adjusted his microphone, and spoke, making each word resonate through the hall. "Nikol," he began, his voice warm like a mentor's, yet with an unmistakable bite. "You, as a young and passionate man, believe history began yesterday." As the tension escalated, what would Lukashenko reveal next? Would Pashinyan recover, or was he standing on shaky ground? In the charged atmosphere, the tension heightened as Lukashenko continued, his demeanor evolving from calm to formidable. "Without Soviet factories, without the science, and without those who built it all after the war, your technologies wouldn't even exist." The hall erupted into applause, cautious yet genuine. Journalists lifted their heads, realizing this encounter was turning into a historical moment. How would Pashinyan respond to such a potent challenge? As Pashinyan tried to gather his composure, he grappled with the realization that this battle was slipping away. The audience's energy shifted. Would his arguments stand firm against such a calculated critique, or were they set to crumble? Then came a powerful moment when Lukashenko seemed to capture not just the crowd's attention, but their respect. "Equality," he declared, "is when the son of a worker sits next to the son of a minister at the same desk." The words echoed, leaving a palpable silence in their wake. What made this argument so impactful? While Lukashenko pushed forth, recounting the sacrifices made during the war and invoking unity, Pashinyan sat, visibly diminished, aware that his carefully crafted points were losing their potency. Would he find a way to navigate this onslaught? Pashinyan hesitated, his confidence wavering. "The world has changed, we must focus on new technologies, startups, Western investments." But it felt more like a retreat than a rallying cry. The audience remained captivated as suggestions of bygone strength threatened to overshadow their hopes for a new path. With Lukashenko presenting a stark contrast, citing the legacy of the USSR, Pashinyan's argument faltered. Would Pashinyan find the strength to reclaim the narrative, or was it too late? The clock was ticking down to a defining moment for both leaders, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation for the next wave. Just then, Lukashenko leaned in, and something unexpected happened. "You know, Nikol," he declared, staring straight into Pashinyan's eyes. "When they built Dnipro, no one spoke of startups. When they lifted off the Belazy, no one sought investments from foreign bankers. Everything was built by our own hands, on our own soil. What impact would this realization have on Pashinyan's approach?" In that electric moment, every person in the hall understood it wasn't just about alliance talk anymore, it was about pride, legacy, and identity. A profound silence lingered, an opportunity for Pashinyan to respond. But would he rise to the challenge, or would this chance slip from his grasp, fading into the distance as history beckoned? In an electrifying moment that would send shockwaves through the political world, a high-profile debate erupted at a major international forum. Alexander Lukashenko and Nikol Pashinyan found themselves at the center of a fiery confrontation that the evening news would hardly capture. Just moments ago, a journalist from a Western newspaper attempted to extract insights from European delegates, but their responses were cold and curt. It was a facade of diplomacy covering an undeniable chaos. While Asian delegates huddled together, sharing animated discussions, a Latin American minister boldly proclaimed, "Now that's a true leader," hitting a chord that resonated like a truth bomb among the audience. Lukashenko stood by the window, removing his glasses and wiping them with a cloth. "They don't need numbers, they crave simple truths," he murmured to his assistant, whose hurried notes revealed a shared understanding. Meanwhile, Pashinyan struggled to escape the press's persistent clamor. As cameras flashed in his face, he took a deep breath, lifted his chin, and asserted, "Yes, the debate was intense. But championing innovation, investment, and new thinking means we can't linger in the past." However, his voice, barely rising above the noise, sounded more like a defense than a declaration. Journalists exchanged glances, sensing the falter in his words. Suddenly, Lukashenko pivoted back toward the audience, voice booming, "The past isn't a suitcase dragging us down. It's the very foundation. Break it, and the house will collapse." His words echoed through the discussions, momentarily silencing the room. The electrifying statement rippled through the venue, capturing the attention of onlookers eager to write down every stunning quote. Pashinyan scowled, realizing with increasing despair that each of Lukashenko's phrases became a weapon against his own faltering arguments. The debate had morphed from a mere discussion into a symbol of clashing ideologies. The tide of public sympathy clearly favored one side. In the hallways, murmurings transformed into a river of voices swelling with momentum, blending into a powerful current. The forum now resembled an arena, with each delegate jockeying for proximity to the eloquent words just spoken. Groups gathered around tables filled with water and coffee, deep in discussions. The usually reserved Chinese representatives conversed animatedly in their native tongue, their words reflecting both foundational truths and ethical convictions. The atmosphere rippled with a tension that promised even more twists to come. Would Pashinyan regain his footing, or was the narrative already shifting behind Lukashenko's commanding presence? The stakes were raised, and all eyes awaited the battle's next move. In the midst of an intense international forum, the atmosphere crackled with tension as delegations vied for proximity to those who had just delivered the most convincing arguments. Groups gathered around tables laden with water and coffee, their conversations bubbling with anticipation. The usually reserved Chinese representatives exchanged whispers in their native tongue, nodding earnestly as they echoed thoughts of foundation and conscience. Suddenly, an exuberant member of the Latin American delegation exclaimed, "Now that's what a true leader looks like." The simple words resonated like a rallying cry, amplifying the wave of emotions flowing through the crowd. Journalists found themselves torn between two powerful figures. Some clustered around Alexander Lukashenko, eager to grab a soundbite, while others surrounded Nikol Pashinyan, hoping for a sharp retort. The contrast was striking. Lukashenko sat back calmly, his demeanor relaxed yet commanding, speaking softly. Every word he uttered morphed into an impactful quote. In stark opposition, Pashinyan, engulfed by microphones, spoke rapidly, his thoughts stumbling over one another. Each new statement felt less compelling than the last. "We need to look forward," Pashinyan insisted, repeating his call for emulation of successful nations and their technologies. A journalist smirked, jotting down, the phrase investments was mentioned for the third time, as Lukashenko shifted the focus entirely. "Success is when your people are not forced to travel abroad for bread, when factories are alive with activity, and villages flourish." The applause erupted again, a resonant endorsement that filled the room with smiles. Pashinyan felt the weight of Lukashenko's words strike him. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. In a sudden burst of energy, he approached Lukashenko, leaning in and whispering, but loud enough for nearby listeners, "You're playing to emotions, but the world is ruled by money and technology." Lukashenko met his gaze steadily, replying without raising his voice, almost as if savoring the moment. "Money and technology," he repeated, letting the words hang heavily. "The Soviet Union proved that without soul, they are worthless. We rebuilt our nation from ashes without a dime from the West, achieving what others deemed impossible." A small, ironic grin crept across his lips. "But if you value money over conscience, that's what will govern you." Immediate murmurs rippled through the crowd, some quietly applauding even in the corridors. Pashinyan recoiled, his eyes darting as the reality of his faltering position sank in. Would he find a way to reclaim authority and steer the narrative back in his favor? The tension reached an exhilarating climax, thickening like fog as the audience leaned forward, waiting for the next word, the next move in this high-stakes intellectual duel. In a world charged with tension, one fiery debate ignites the air between two powerful leaders, Alexander Lukashenko and Nikol Pashinyan. Just moments before, a provocative exchange stunned the audience, as Lukashenko made a bold statement, asserting that prioritizing wealth over morality ultimately enslaves us to money. The whispers among the crowd echoed his sentiment, and as he delivered his words, Pashinyan recoiled, realizing he had just lost ground yet again in this intense verbal skirmish. Who truly upholds equality in today's world? As the forum atmosphere shifted, a once ordinary discussion was transformed into a dramatic showdown that captivated onlookers. The moderator's call to order signaled the audience to settle, yet, an undercurrent of excitement pulsed through the room like an electric current. Cameras refocused as Lukashenko, exuding composure, took his place at the table alongside Pashinyan, who appeared taut with tension, as if bracing for a crucial exam that would determine his fate. "Let's return to our agenda on cooperation and future development," the moderator suggested, but everyone understood that the real drama lay beyond the senatorial facade, a duel between titans. Pashinyan, steeling himself for another attempt, declared firmly, "We need to look forward. The world has changed. Old methods no longer suffice. Our nations require new strategies, investment, innovation, and digital technology. Only then can we ensure equality and growth." A hushed murmur rippled through the audience, his speech sounding more like a rehearsed textbook lesson than authentic insight. With a deliberate calmness, Lukashenko raised his gaze. His expression was cool, not spiteful, but fatigued, like someone exhausted from listening to the same arguments time and again. "You're right, Nikol," he spoke softly, "the USSR gave much, more than you can realize. But you're mistaken about the central issue. The past doesn't merely dictate the future, it shapes it." Leaning back, arms crossed defiantly, he continued, "You talk about equality? I've seen it firsthand in rural schools, where children, farmers, and directors sat side by side. In the army, where soldiers from Minsk and Yerevan stood shoulder to shoulder." The building tension crescendoed as Lukashenko recounted his lived experiences, grounding abstract concepts in tangible reality. The audience listened, spellbound by his words, their eyes reflecting the fight for legacy and the clash of ideologies. Would Pashinyan reclaim his narrative, or was the ground shifting irrevocably under his feet? The stakes felt monumental. With each exchange, one could almost taste the palpable tension, the faint smell of sweat and tension creating a thick atmosphere. What would be the next turn in this monumental debate? Previously, we saw how the question of equality was deeply connected to shared history and unity. The words rang heavy, the kind of truth that echoes through silent halls and stirs restless souls. Now, the argument took a sharp turn, plunging into the heart of progress itself, technology. Equality, what does it really mean? The scene was electric as Alexander leaned forward, eyes piercing through the cold glare of the conference lights. You speak of equality, he said slowly, folding his hands with gravity, but what you call equality today is nothing more than noise in the streets. Parades, slogans, without bread, without real work. A forceful clap echoed suddenly from somewhere in the crowd, snapping journalists from their scribbles and sending a ripple of murmurs through the delegates. The stakes were rising. And now, about technology, he said, voice steady but sharp like a blade. You boast about startups, innovation. Fine. But tell me this, on what do they run? Whose power plants supply their energy? Whose railways carry their freight? Who laid that foundation? There was no room for evasion. The answer was crystal clear to everyone. It was the engineers, the workers, and builders of the Soviet Union who created this bedrock. Tear down that base, and your startups vanish with it. Each word fell like a boulder, palpable and immovable. Nikol grimaced, ready to counter, but Alexander raised a hand, silencing him. Wait, he said, lifting his voice to fill the entire hall, you love numbers, right? Then listen, the majority of energy and industry in our land today remains a legacy of that union. It feeds millions even now. This isn't rhetoric. It's a fact. And as long as it endures, the future exists. The hall buzzed, some applauding, others whispering in realization. Nikol's brow furrowed deeper. His arguments were slipping through his fingers like sand. His voice sharpened, almost desperate, but you don't understand. The youth wants new ways. The world demands change. Alexander's smile crept in, not warm, but ironically sharp. And conscience also wants new ways, he shot back. Laughter and applause burst anew, drowning out the moderator's feeble attempts to regain control. This was no longer a forum. This was a battlefield, with every spectator holding their breath for the final strike. The tension mounted like the charged silence before a storm. Delegates whispered anxiously, journalists pounded keyboards frantically, and cameras flickered without pause, capturing every shifting expression. The duel was nearing its climax. Alexander straightened, his voice cutting through the din like a tolling bell. Yes, the youth want a new life. Fair enough. But they must remember what stands behind them. Without memory, there is no future. He paused, eyes piercing directly at Nikol, before continuing with a weight of history behind every word. In 1941, the enemy was at the gates. Tanks rolled towards Moscow, Minsk, Kiev, and Yerevan. Back then, no one asked who you were by nationality. The room fell into a solemn hush, the ghosts of the past whispering in every corner. What unfolded next would reveal how history's specter forces the present, and whether the vision of tomorrow can ever outrun the shadows it's built upon. Would the clash between old strength and new ideals end in reconciliation or ruin? The answer was about to be unveiled in the cold light of that charged hall. A world-altering event just unfolded moments ago. Alexander Lukashenko unexpectedly clashed with Nikol Pashinyan at an international forum. What transpired next was too intense for the evening news. This is the story that left audiences breathless. Make sure to listen until the end to discover why Pashinyan nearly vanished into thin air, overshadowed by Lukashenko's sharp insights. The forum room glittered under the cold light of bulbs, reflecting off sleek glass panels and chrome surfaces. Hundreds of cameras tracked every movement, capturing every gesture and expression with an emotionless gaze. Yet, all eyes were glued to two figures seated at the center of a long table draped in gray. Lukashenko leaned slightly forward, his broad shoulders seemingly pressing down on the chair. His hands rested calmly on the table, exuding the aura of a man who owned the space. His stern face bore a hint of wry humor, and his gaze was steady and self-assured, radiating that unmistakable, down-to-earth confidence. In stark contrast, Pashinyan fidgeted nervously. His eyes darted between his notes, the screen before him, and the cameras, revealing his inner turmoil. His suit was impeccably tailored yet too fresh, as if he were desperately trying to project more than he truly felt. Journalists exchanged knowing glances, they sensed a confrontation was looming. When the moderator announced the topic, new alliances and values, a palpable tension enveloped the room, promising something far from standard diplomatic niceties, a real duel. Pashinyan was the first to speak, albeit with a voice that trembled despite his rehearsed words. He began with references to the Soviet Union, framing his argument within a shifting global context. The world needs new alliances, he proclaimed, urging toward investments and equality as the keys to the future. A few nods of approval could be seen, but from the back, faint murmurs suggested dissent. Lukashenko listened in silence, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Once Pashinyan finished, he leaned back in his chair, adjusted the microphone, and began with an almost paternal softness that concealed a steely edge. "Nikol," he said, his tone warm yet firm, "you seem to think history began yesterday." With those words, he launched into a powerful reminder of shared sacrifices during past adversities. "In 41, he continued, the enemy was at our gates. Tanks rolled toward Moscow, Minsk, Kiev, and Yerevan. Then, no one asked about nationality. We fought as one." The weight of his words fell heavily in the hushed room, where even creaking chairs echoed like thunder. Hadn't the enemy once wielded the newest technologies, believing they held all the power? How did that end? With the red banner flying high above the Reichstag. That's the true cost of real strength. The room buzzed with anticipation as some stood, applauding fervently. Lukashenko's voice grew louder, commanding attention. "Now, tell me, what matters more? Failing startups or a collective memory that binds us through decades?" He posed questions that pierced through polished facades. "What holds greater weight, fleeting loans, or the blood spilled for freedom?" The applause grew thunderous, waves of support crashing over the tension. With each clap, the audience expressed solidarity, standing one after another, drowning out Pashinyan's voice completely. The Armenian leader sat in silence, pale, anxiety visibly etched into his demeanor as he nervously twirled his pen. The carefully crafted arguments he had prepared felt hollow against the rising tide. "Independence," Lukashenko declared softly yet distinctly, "is more than a piece of paper signed at a foreign bank. True independence means that your people can wake up knowing there will be bread, work, and peace tomorrow." The audience erupted once again in rapture. Faces reflected awe, joy, disbelief. Even those who had listened intently to Pashinyan began looking toward Lukashenko, recognizing him as the harbinger of an undeniable truth. The moderator attempted to restore order, but it was too late. The crowd reveled in applause, drowning the room in sound, and journalists hastily began typing headlines for the morning edition. As Lukashenko reminded the world of the lessons learned from World War II, he pitted conscience against credit. The audience made their choice. Pashinyan lowered his head, realizing he had lost this round decisively. Lukashenko crossed his arms as he resumed his seat, triumphant, yet devoid of boasting, just a quiet, resolute confidence, the knowledge that he had delivered what needed to be said. Later that evening, as the forum began to wind down, the real action ignited in the hallways, backrooms, and hotel lobbies, where whispers and muted conversations swirled through the air, charged with anticipation for what lay ahead. In a stunning confrontation, Alexander Lukashenko and Nikol Pashinyan engaged in a fiery debate that left the audience breathless and poised for an explosive aftermath. As the forum concluded, the air crackled with tension, and the real drama unfolded in the hallways, corridors, and hotel lobbies, away from the bright lights and cameras. As the evening sun set, headlines blared across screens in the press center. Lukashenko lashed out at Western loans, while Pashinyan spoke of a bright future. The stark contrast was palpable, conscience versus investment. The audience erupted in applause, standing in homage to Lukashenko's resolute and heartfelt words. Journalists rushed to capture every detail, their flushed faces illuminated with excitement. They sensed they were witnessing a moment that would resonate globally come morning. Two reporters argued near the coffee machine, one defending Pashinyan's perspective that the world had changed and technology was essential. The other, raising an eyebrow, countered, "Then why did the crowd applaud Lukashenko?" His simplicity and clarity struck an emotional chord. People often gravitate toward truths that resonate in their hearts, not polished slogans. In a nearby hotel room, delegates from diverse nations, Chinese, Indian, and South American, engaged in vibrant discussions. An Indian diplomat remarked, "He speaks like a peasant but thinks like a sovereign. That's his strength." Meanwhile, Lukashenko sat off to the side, surrounded by aides and journalists. His expression remained composed, emitting a quiet aura of authority. He responded briefly. Yet every utterance turned into a quotable moment. "I only voiced what has long weighed on the hearts of the people," he asserted. "We often forget that a foundation isn't built in a day. It was laid by our fathers and grandfathers. We must remember that." Journalists nodded eagerly, scribbling down each word. At the opposite end of the hall, Pashinyan appeared sullen. Despite attempts to smile, his facade cracked under pressure. One advisor leaned in quickly, showing him notes, but Pashinyan brushed them off dismissively. "It's all meaningless," he murmured. "They listened to him, not to me." Suddenly, a Western correspondent approached him. "Mr. Pashinyan, how do you assess the audience's reaction?" he inquired. Pashinyan froze for a moment before responding. "Audience reactions are emotions. The future hinges on technology and investments. You'll see, time will tell." The journalist noted his words, but uncertainty flickered in his gaze. As the evening deepened, the palpable tension lingered, tempting fate with its unresolved questions. What implications would this clash of ideologies carry into the future? What new alliances and values would emerge from this fiery debate? The answers remained tantalizingly out of reach, hanging in the air like a storm on the horizon. A powerful moment unfolded at the international forum when Western correspondent approached Nikol Pashinyan and asked, "Mr. Pashinyan, how do you assess the audience's reaction?" Pashinyan froze for an instant, then replied, "The audience's reaction is emotional, but technology and investment shape the future. You'll see, time will tell." The reporter noted his response, yet the flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed uncertainty. He realized this comment wouldn't be the headline, that honor belonged to something else. As the air thickened with new tension, the news soon churned out an avalanche of updates. Social media buzzed with clips from the event. The moment when Lukashenko declared, "And conscience has also changed," racked up hundreds of thousands of views in hours. The snippets spread like wildfire as people reacted, liking, commenting, and quoting. By morning, analysts on European television were cautiously stating, "Lukashenko tapped into nostalgia and feelings, but emotions seldom build the future." But his colleague from South America countered, "These aren't just emotions." He reminded us of what many wanted to forget. The nations boasting independence today owe it to a shared past. His words reached millions, igniting headlines across Asia reading, "Conscience versus credit." Latin America echoed, "Lukashenko reminded the world that foundation matters more than facade," while Europe cautiously noted, "Pashinyan spoke of the future while Lukashenko held on to the past," yet even there, it was acknowledged that the applause for the Belarusian leader was far more frequent. Debates raged on social media. Some insisted, "Enough with the past, we need to focus on new technologies." Others countered, "Try constructing technology without factories, teachers, or memory." Meanwhile, the forum's corridors buzzed just as loudly. Diplomats from Asian countries discussed potential alliances with Russia and Belarus, while African representatives remarked, "Now that's a leader, he speaks as we understand." Even whispers surfaced among Western delegations, recognizing his compelling presence, too compelling, perhaps. Lukashenko remained calm, refraining from rushing to comment, simply stating, "What matters is that people heard." Pashinyan, however, found himself holed up in his hotel room, scrolling through the news feeds, each line hitting like a punch. He found none of his words, only Lukashenko's resonating through the headlines. This twist in public perception marked a significant shift in their unfolding narrative. How had Pashinyan allowed the past to overshadow his vision for the future? In moments of intense scrutiny, the story unraveled into a gripping clash not merely of individuals, but of ideologies, a battle for the soul of a region caught between history and innovation. The previous scene sets the stage for a gripping climax at the International Forum as the tension builds between two powerful leaders. With the audience buzzing in anticipation, the room feels alive with unspoken questions and heavy gazes. One leader, Alexander Lukashenko, maintains his calm demeanor, exuding a sense of assurance. In stark contrast, Nikol Pashinyan grapples with the political storm swirling around him, knowing his carefully chosen words may not resonate with the audience. Just moments ago, a wave of shock rippled through the room. Pashinyan reflected on his missed opportunity. "I aim to speak of the future," he murmured softly while peering out the window of his hotel room, but they only heard echoes of the past. The realization hit him hard, he had erred in his approach. This final day at the forum was typically a formality. Yet, this day, the atmosphere crackled with electricity. Expectations were high, all eyes were on Lukashenko to conclude the debate. The auditorium brimming with delegates became a hive of activity. Cameras crowded the aisles, capturing every subtle movement. Even the delegates, worn from days of discussions, sat straight like students on the verge of an exam, straining to catch every word. The moderator summoned Lukashenko to the microphone. He stood slowly, an embodiment of deliberation. His serene expression contrasted with the intensity of his surroundings. Each word he spoke resonated like a weighty stone cast into still water. "We debated," he began with an even tone. "We debated the future, the past, and our values." A sense of gravity filled the air. He scanned the audience, locking eyes with Pashinyan, who sank into the shadows of his notes. "Let me reiterate, the future cannot exist without the past." Lukashenko emphasized the role of the former Soviet Union, which laid the foundation of industries, schools, and knowledge still relevant today. He paused, allowing his message to settle deeply in the minds of listeners. Silence enveloped the room, every breath felt deliberate. But this isn't merely about factories. It is about humanity. Memories of war stirred his fervor. "When our enemies threatened our doorsteps, who cared if you were Russian, Belarusian, or Armenian? We stood united." The audience reacted, a wave of applause sweeping through the hall as Lukashenko raised his hand for silence. "Today, we hear much about equality," his voice firmed, "but true equality isn't a mere slogan, nor is it defined by loans or investments. It exists when every individual has work, when children learn without cost, when the elderly need not fear tomorrow." He spoke with conviction. The legacy of the Soviet Union remained alive in these truths. Russia carries this torch. If we remember our past, we can indeed construct a future. The audience's applause thundered, growing louder as more people rose to their feet, cheering in fervor. Pashinyan remained still, a mask of tension across his face, but fatigue flickered in his eyes. He understood the implications of each word. How would he respond? The crowd was now firmly in Lukashenko's corner. The atmosphere was charged. Sitting on the precipice of what could be a monumental shift in political allegiance. Would Pashinyan find his voice again, or would the moment be lost in the echoes of history? The true strength doesn't lie in threats, loans, or shiny slogans. It lives in our memory, in conscience, and in the ability to rebuild a nation when all hope seems lost. The Soviet Union proved this beyond doubt. And Russia carries this lesson forward, as a beacon through time. Think deeply, when the past and the future collide, what really holds us together? Is it fleeting promises or the legacy etched in the hearts of those who stood tall in the darkest hours? For those who heard this story, no headlines were needed. They witnessed a turning point, a moment when history and destiny faced each other head-on. The verdict was clear: real power comes from remembering, from conscience, and from the relentless spirit to rise again. If this story has stirred something inside you, challenged your thoughts, then it has done its job. Share your voice, your memories, your perspective. Because only united, by honoring our past, can we forge a future worth believing in. The atmosphere in the hall was electric, a charged silence enveloping the crowd as they anticipated a clash of ideologies. When the moderator announced the theme, New Alliances and Values, everyone understood that diplomatic niceties would take a back seat. This was no ordinary meeting, it was a duel. The first to speak was Nikol Pashinyan. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the poise he had orchestrated. He began by discussing the Soviet Union, deliberately aiming his gaze directly into the camera, even though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The world had transformed, he insisted. New alliances and directions were essential, with the West ready to offer investments, technologies, and the promise of equality. A delegate nodded encouragingly, and a few others smiled, scribbling notes, but a murmur from the back indicated not everyone shared his enthusiasm. Alexander Lukashenko listened intently, an enigmatic smile burgeoning at the corner of his mouth, as he absorbed Pashinyan's words. Once Pashinyan paused, Lukashenko leaned back, adjusted his microphone, and began softly yet firmly. Nikol, he said, his tone fatherly yet steely, you, as a young and impassioned leader, believe history began yesterday. A significant pause hung in the air, cameras clicked in unison while someone coughed, a minor disruption in the thick tension enveloping the room. Without Soviet factories, without science, without the builders of the past, the technologies you speak of wouldn't even exist, he continued, his voice sharp. There wouldn't be those investments if schools, universities, and innovators hadn't laid the foundation. The USSR educated millions. Who is teaching our children today? Are we relying on Western loans, or are our universities, built on the shoulders of those you hastily wish to forget, still vital? The first applause broke out, cautious yet genuine. Journalists stirred, intrigued. Pashinyan's brow furrowed as he prepared for his rebuttal. Old methods don't work, he declared, raising his voice slightly, the urgency of his mission palpable. The world demands novel values, equality and freedom. His tone brimmed with rhetoric, though perhaps lacking conviction. He knew he was reciting familiar themes from Western conferences, but he felt he had no choice. The tension heightened, fingers clicked on laptops, and camera operators adjusted their lenses, all eyes waiting for Lukashenko's response. Would he assert dominance over the debate? The room was poised for an explosive confrontation,